Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. This summer camp turned into a bloodbath. Who will survive? Scray story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. Arrival at Camp Blackwood. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dense woods that flanked the winding road. The old camp bus rattled and groaned as it rolled to a stop in front of a weathered sign that read Camp Blackwood. Alex stepped off the bus, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The place was a far cry from the glossy brochure that promised fun and adventure. Instead, an ominous lake glistened under the fading light, and dilapidated cabins stood like silent sentinels in the gathering gloom. "Welcome to Camp Blackwood," boomed the camp director, a tall man with a perpetual frown etched into his face. His enthusiasm seemed forced, a stark contrast to the nervous energy buzzing among the campers. Alex's friends trailed behind him. Mia, his best friend, was already bouncing with excitement. Her fearless nature always made her the first to dive into any adventure. Jason, the group's jokester, tried to mask his anxiety with humor, nudging Sarah, who observed everything with quiet intensity. Ben, ever the skeptic, muttered under his breath about how the camp looked like the set of a horror movie. "Come on, guys. It's just a little rustic charm," Alex said, trying to lighten the mood. Yet, even he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. That evening, they gathered around a crackling campfire. The camp director's forced cheer had vanished, replaced by a more somber tone as he recounted the camp's history. Rumors of disappearances and ghost sightings hung heavy in the air. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the faces of the campers. An old man, introduced as the groundskeeper, stood at the edge of the circle, his gaze fixed on the woods. "Stay away from the boathouse," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not safe after dark." The warning was clear, but Mia, ever the thrill-seeker, rolled her eyes. "What's the worst that could happen?" she whispered to Alex. As night fell, the camp settled into an uneasy silence. The sounds of the forest seemed amplified in the darkness. Mia, daring as always, suggested they explore the old boathouse. Despite the uneasy feeling gnawing at him, Alex found himself agreeing. Jason and Sarah hesitated, but Ben scoffed. "It's just an old shed. What could be so scary?" They crept through the forest, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the thick fog that had settled over the camp. The boathouse loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the inky blackness of the lake. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic. "Mia," Alex's voice echoed in the emptiness. There was no response. Panic set in as they searched, their calls growing more frantic. Jason stumbled over something and let out a gasp. At the water's edge, they found Maya's shoe, soaked and abandoned. The night closed in around them, and the camp's dark secrets began to stir. Chapter 2. The First Night. The moon hung high, casting a ghostly glow over Camp Blackwood as Alex and his friends stared at Maya's abandoned shoe. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, amplifying every rustle and whisper. "Maybe she just went back to the cabin," Jason suggested, his voice trembling despite his attempt at nonchalance. "You know how Mia loves a good scare." Sarah shook her head, her eyes wide with worry. "We need to tell the counselors." "This isn't funny anymore," Ben scoffed, crossing his arms. "And tell them what? That Mia decided to play a prank and scare us all. She'll show up laughing any minute now." Alex's mind raced. The feeling of responsibility weighed heavily on him. Mia was his best friend, and he had let her go into the boathouse alone. "I'm going to find her," he said, his voice firm. "You guys can go back if you want, but I'm not leaving her out here." The group hesitated, then reluctantly agreed to stay together. They fanned out, searching the darkened woods with their flashlights. The trees seemed to close in around them, and strange noises echoed through the night, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the distant hoot of an owl. Jason tried to lighten the mood with a joke about horror movies, but his voice cracked, betraying his fear. "Hey, maybe we'll get to be the heroes in our own scary movie. The brave teens of Camp Blackwood." No one laughed. Sarah shivered, glancing over her shoulder. "This place is giving me the creeps. We should have stayed by the campfire." As they pushed deeper into the forest, Alex's flashlight caught something strange on a nearby tree. He stepped closer, his breath hitching as he read the words carved into the bark. "They are watching." "Guys, look at this," Alex called out, his voice low and urgent. The others gathered around, their faces pale in the moonlight. "Who the hell would write that?" Jason whispered, his bravado crumbling. Sarah's eyes darted around the darkened forest. "This is bad. We need to get back and tell someone." Ben remained skeptical, though less certain. "It's probably just another prank. But, yeah, maybe we should go back." The tension among them rose, trust fraying at the edges. Alex clenched his fists, determined not to let fear overwhelm him. "We need to stick together and keep looking for Mia. If we don't find her soon, then we go back for help." Their search continued, but with every step, the forest seemed more alive, more sinister. Shadows moved just beyond the reach of their flashlights, and eerie whispers brushed against their ears, as if the trees themselves were murmuring secrets. As the hours dragged on, Alex felt the weight of the night pressing in. Mia was still missing, and now a deeper, more insidious fear had taken root. The cryptic message carved into the tree lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder that they were not alone and that something or someone was watching. Chapter 3: Searching for Answers. The forest had grown colder, an eerie silence hanging in the air as Alex and his friends reluctantly made their way back to camp. Mia was still missing, and the cryptic message, "They are watching," etched into the tree, had left them all on edge. "We need to split up and cover more ground," Alex declared as they reached the clearing. "Jason and Sarah, you check the abandoned boathouse again. Ben and I will look around the old dining hall and the counselor's cabin." "Splitting up? That's horror movie. 101 for bad idea," Jason quipped, but his usual humor was strained, his eyes darting nervously. "We'll be faster this way," Sarah said, trying to sound confident but failing to hide the tremor in her voice. With flashlights in hand, they divided and set off in different directions. The camp seemed to grow darker, the shadows longer and more menacing. Alex and Ben approached the old dining hall, its windows dark and foreboding. "Look, I still think this is all some elaborate prank," Ben muttered as they pushed open the creaky door. "But that message on the tree, I don't know, man." Inside, the dining hall was a cavern of dust and decay. Broken tables and chairs lay scattered, and the air was thick with the scent of mold. They searched methodically, finding nothing but debris until Alex spotted something glinting in a corner. "Mia's bracelet," he whispered, picking up the blood-stained charm. His heart pounded as he showed it to Ben. "Okay, that's creepy," Ben admitted, his skepticism wavering. "But it doesn't mean she's, you know." "We need more clues," Alex said, trying to stay focused. They moved on to the counselor's cabin, its door ajar as if inviting them in. The interior was just as neglected, but a dusty old desk caught Alex's eye. He rifled through the drawers, finding a bundle of old camp records. "Check this out," Alex said, handing some papers to Ben. They scanned through the records, each one hinting at past disappearances, strange incidents that were never fully explained. Meanwhile, Jason and Sarah were back at the boathouse. "We missed something last time," Sarah insisted. She was right. Hidden under a loose floorboard, they discovered a tattered journal filled with strange symbols and cryptic notes about rituals. "This doesn't look like a prank," Jason said, his voice shaking. "We need to show this to Alex." They regrouped at the center of the camp, sharing their findings. The bloody bracelet, the unsettling camp records, and the bizarre journal painted a chilling picture. As they debated their next move, a shadowy figure emerged from the woods. It was Mrs. Thompson, the camp counselor. She glanced around nervously before disappearing into the trees. "Why is she sneaking around at this hour?" Sarah whispered, suspicion flaring. "We need to follow her," Alex said, his determination growing. "She might know something about Maya." With their flashlights piercing the darkness, they trailed Mrs. Thompson into the forest, every rustle and whisper heightening their fear. As they moved deeper into the woods, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, the words from the tree echoing in their minds. Chapter 4. The Hidden History of Camp Blackwood. The forest seemed to close in around Alex and his friends as they followed Mrs. Thompson through the dense underbrush. Every crack of a twig and rustle of leaves sent their hearts racing. They kept a safe distance, careful not to alert her to their presence. She finally stopped at a clearing, where an ancient moss-covered altar stood, eerily illuminated by the moonlight. Mrs. Thompson knelt before the altar, whispering inaudible words. The group exchanged anxious glances. Alex's grip tightened around the journal they had found, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and notes about rituals. "We need to know what she's doing," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "This place, it feels wrong." Alex nodded, flipping through the journal's pages. The words seemed to dance on the paper, as if alive. He found a passage that described rituals conducted by a cult that once inhabited the area. They believed in summoning spirits to grant them power and immortality. The price, sacrifices. "This place has a dark history," Alex whispered, reading aloud. There were several mysterious deaths and disappearances linked to these rituals. They used this very altar. As Alex read, strange occurrences began to escalate. Sarah's vision blurred, and she stumbled, clutching her head. "I see them," she gasped. "The spirits. They are angry." Jason, trying to shake off his fear, heard a chilling sound, ghostly laughter, echoing through the trees. His face went pale. "Did you guys hear that?" Ben, who had been skeptical from the start, now saw a figure emerging from the lake. It was translucent, gliding across the water. His skepticism shattered, replaced by pure terror. "There's something out there," he whispered, voice shaking. Fear and paranoia gripped the group. They argued about what to do next. Ben wanted to leave. His skepticism now turned into sheer panic. Jason tried to crack a joke to ease the tension, but failed miserably. Sarah insisted they needed to uncover the full truth to save Mia. "Look at us," Alex said, trying to regain control. "We're falling apart. We need to stay together and figure this out." Mrs. Thompson might have answers. They watched as she completed her ritual and disappeared back into the woods. As they approached the altar, Alex noticed carvings on the stone symbols, matching those in the journal. They were standing on the very ground where the cult once performed their dark ceremonies. These rituals, they weren't just for show, Alex said, his voice grim. They believed in summoning spirits. Maybe they succeeded. As they delved deeper into the camp's past, Their fear grew. The chilling history of Camp Blackwood was no longer just a story, it was a living nightmare. The strange occurrences intensified, and with each revelation, the group's trust frayed further. The night seemed endless, filled with whispers and shadows. They were not just searching for Maya anymore. They were battling an ancient darkness that had awoken. The secrets of Camp Blackwood were clawing their way back to the surface, and the group was caught in its deadly grip. Chapter 5: Descent into Madness. The weight of the night's discoveries bore heavily on Alex as he and his friends trudged back to camp. Each step felt like they were sinking deeper into a nightmare they couldn't wake from. The shadows around them seemed alive, whispering dark secrets that made their skin crawl. Alex's sleep was restless, haunted by nightmares of Maya. He saw her standing by the lake, her eyes wide with terror, calling out for help. Her voice echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of his failure to protect her. He awoke in a cold sweat, the thin walls of the cabin offering no comfort from the oppressive darkness outside. Jason sat by the window, muttering to himself. His usual humor had vanished, replaced by a vacant stare and frantic whispers. "They're watching us, Alex. They know we're here." "Snap out of it, Jason," Alex said, shaking his friend. But deep down, he felt the same fear gnawing at him. Sarah and Ben joined them, their faces pale. "We can't call for help," Sarah said, holding up her phone. "No signal." "The camp radio is dead too," Ben added. "We're completely cut off." The realization of their isolation sank in. They were trapped in Camp Blackwood, surrounded by an ancient evil that seemed to be tightening its grip. As they ventured outside, supernatural elements became more prominent. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects moved without explanation, and ghostly apparitions flickered at the edge of their vision. "Did you see that?" Jason yelled, pointing to a shadow that darted across the trees. "We're not alone." Tensions ran high as fear and paranoia festered. Alex tried to hold the group together, but the strain was evident. Arguments erupted over the smallest things, and trust eroded with each passing hour. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. Ben was on the ground, writhing in pain as an unseen force attacked him. His skin tore as if clawed by invisible hands, and he gasped for breath, his eyes wide with terror. "Help him!" Sarah screamed, rushing to Ben's side. Alex and Jason fought to pull Ben away from whatever was attacking him, their efforts frantic and desperate. Finally, the assault stopped, leaving Ben trembling and bleeding. "What was that?" Jason panted, his face ashen. "We can't stay here." Alex's mind raced. They were up against something far beyond their understanding, something ancient and malevolent. "We have to figure out how to stop this," he said, his voice resolute despite his fear. "We need to find Maya and put an end to whatever's happening here." The camp felt more hostile with each passing moment, the supernatural elements growing stronger and more aggressive. The group's resolve was tested as they faced their worst fears, battling both the unseen forces and their own unraveling sanity. As night fell once more, Alex knew they were running out of time. The descent into madness was accelerating, and if they didn't act soon, they might not survive the horrors of Camp Blackwood. The ancient evil was awake, and it had them in its sights. Chapter 6: The Fight for Survival. The night air was thick with dread, as and his remaining friends huddled in the cabin, their makeshift barricades the only defense against the malevolent forces that surrounded them. Ben's wounds from the previous attack were bandaged, but his eyes held a haunted look that mirrored the fear gripping them all. "We need to stay together," Alex said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "We can't let fear tear us apart." Jason nodded, his hands trembling as he fashioned crude traps from whatever they could find. "I never signed up for this," he muttered, his eyes darting to the shadows lurking just beyond the cabin walls. Sarah, ever observant, studied the journal they had found. "There's a ritual here," she said softly, tracing her finger over the ancient symbols. "It might be the key to stopping this." Alex took the journal from her, his mind racing. The ritual described a way to appease the spirits, to undo the dark magic that had unleashed terror upon Camp Blackwood. But the cost was steep sacrifice. "We have to do this," Alex said, his gaze meeting theirs with unwavering determination. "It's our only chance to save Maya and ourselves." The group debated the risks, their voices a mix of fear and determination. Jason argued for leaving immediately, while Ben's skepticism resurfaced, questioning the journal's authenticity. Sarah, however, believed in its ancient power, convinced it held the key to their survival. As they fortified their defenses and prepared for the ritual, the supernatural forces grew more aggressive. Ghostly apparitions materialized with increasing frequency, their attacks leaving scars both physical and emotional. They fought back with everything they had, their unity tested but unbroken. Night after night, they endured, each moment a battle against the encroaching darkness. Alex stepped into his role as leader, guiding them with a strength born of desperation and love for his friends. Jason's humor became a weapon against fear. Sarah's insights proved invaluable, and Ben, despite his doubts, stood steadfast in the face of danger. In a daring move, Alex led them to the site of the ancient altar, where they would perform the ritual. The air crackled with tension as they gathered under the moonlit sky, the journal's instructions guiding their every move. They recited incantations, their voices trembling with both fear and hope. Suddenly, the forest fell silent. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying whispers of ancient voices. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and shadows danced on the edges of their vision. The ritual reached its climax, a crescendo of power and desperation. And then, silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt heavy with anticipation, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then, slowly, the darkness began to recede. The supernatural forces retreated, leaving behind a profound stillness that echoed through the forest. "We did it," Sarah breathed, her voice barely a whisper. But their victory came at a cost. They had survived, but not without casualties. Their group was smaller now, their bonds forged in blood and sacrifice. As they stood together, battered but alive, Alex knew their fight wasn't over. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged scarred but stronger. The shadows of Camp Blackwood would haunt them forever, a testament to their courage and resilience in the face of unspeakable evil. Chapter 7. Confrontation. The ancient altar loomed before them, bathed in the cold light of the moon. Alex and his friends stood at the edge of the clearing, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The air crackled with tension, and the shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "We end this tonight," Alex said, gripping the journal tightly. The instructions for the final ritual were clear, but the path to completing it was fraught with danger. They stepped forward, their breaths visible in the frigid air. As they approached the altar, ghostly apparitions began to materialize, their faces twisted in agony. The spirits of long-dead cult members surged toward them, their eyes burning with hatred. "Stay together," Alex shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of whispers. They formed a tight circle, their backs to each other as they fended off the spectral onslaught. Sarah's keen eyes spotted the cult member spirits circling the altar, their presence a chilling reminder of the camp's dark past. "We need to break their hold on this place," she said, her voice resolute. Using the knowledge from the journal, They chanted the incantations, their voices rising in defiance of the dark forces. The ground shook beneath them, and the spirits recoiled, momentarily weakened. But the battle was far from over. Mrs. Thompson emerged from the shadows, her face twisted with a mixture of fury and regret. "You fools," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." "You're part of this," Jason spat, his voice laced with betrayal. Mrs. Thompson nodded, her eyes glinting with madness. "I was chosen to protect the power of the cult. You cannot stop us." Before they could react, a trusted friend stepped forward, their face contorted with guilt. "I'm sorry," they whispered, raising a knife. "I didn't want it to come to this." The betrayal hit hard, shaking the group's resolve, but Alex refused to back down. "We can't let them win," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "We have to finish the ritual." With renewed determination, they pressed on. The spirits of the cult members lunged at them, but the group fought back with every ounce of strength they had. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the altar pulsed with dark energy. Suddenly, Ben stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "I'll do it," he said, holding up a sacred dagger. "I'll make the sacrifice." "No," Alex protested, but Ben shook his head. "It's the only way," Ben said softly. "You have to finish the ritual." With a look of grim determination, Ben plunged the dagger into his own chest, the act completing the final step of the ritual. The ground trembled violently, and the spirits screamed in agony as they were pulled back into the abyss. The air cleared, and the oppressive darkness lifted. Alex and his remaining friends stood in stunned silence, the weight of their victory mingling with the grief of their loss. Mrs. Thompson lay lifeless on the ground, her connection to the cult severed. The betrayal of their friend had left a scar, but Ben's sacrifice had given them the strength to prevail. As dawn broke, the first light of morning bathed Camp Blackwood in a new hope. They had confronted the horrors of the past and emerged victorious, but the price had been high. Alex knew they would never forget the terror they faced, nor the friends they lost. But they had survived, and with that survival came the promise of a future free from the shadows of Camp Blackwood's dark history. Chapter 8: Aftermath and Resolution. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows over the clearing. Alex and his remaining friends stood in silence, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. The weight of the night's horrors hung heavy on them, each of them processing the trauma in their own way. Alex knelt beside Ben's lifeless body, his heart aching with grief and guilt. He gently closed Ben's eyes, a silent promise that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. The others gathered around, their faces pale and haunted. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't stay." They stumbled through the woods, every step a reminder of their ordeal. When they finally emerged from the forest, they were met by the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances. The authorities had been alerted by the camp counselors, who had discovered the carnage left in their wake. The camp was quickly cordoned off, a crime scene investigation unfolding as detectives and forensic teams scoured the area. Mrs. Thompson's body was discovered near the altar, her involvement with the cult, a shocking revelation that would dominate the news for weeks. Alex, Jason, and Sarah sat on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in blankets. The paramedics checked their vitals, but the real wounds were hidden deep within. The emotional and psychological toll of the past few days was etched on their faces, their eyes hollow and distant. "I can't believe it's over," Jason said, his voice barely audible. "Ben, he saved us." "He did," Alex replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But we lost so much." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We have to make sure this never happens again." As the camp was shut down indefinitely, the police launched a full-scale investigation into the dark history of Camp Blackwood. The media swarmed the site, sensationalizing the story of the haunted camp and the brave teenagers who survived its horrors. Weeks turned into months, and the survivors tried to piece their lives back together. Alex struggled with nightmares and a gnawing sense of guilt, unable to shake the feeling that he could have done more to save his friends. Therapy sessions helped, but the scars ran deep. One evening, Alex returned to the edge of the forest, compelled by a lingering unease. He stood there, staring into the darkness, his mind replaying the events of that fateful night. As he turned to leave, he noticed something on the ground, a small, weathered journal, eerily similar to the one they had found. He picked it up, his heart racing. The cover was blank, but the pages inside were filled with new entries detailing rituals and warnings. His blood ran cold as he realized the horror might not be over. From the shadows, a pair of eyes watched him. Alex felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He turned, but the figure had disappeared, melting back into the forest. He clutched the journal tightly, a new determination burning within him. The battle with the darkness of Camp Blackwood was far from over, and he knew he had to be ready. Camp might be closed, but its evil still lingered, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to stumble upon its secrets. As Alex walked away, the forest seemed to whisper a promise of future horrors, and a chilling realization settled over him. The nightmare had only just begun.